A Chinese immigrant workers sue over forced labor at illegal marijuana operation on Navajo land. Chinese immigrant workers allege they were lured to northern New Mexico under false pretenses and forced to work 14 hours a day trimming marijuana on the Navajo Nation, where cultivating the plant is illegal, according to a lawsuit filed Wednesday in the state court. Job advertisements for the operation in Shiprock promised $200 per day, housing, and food in exchange for gardening and flower cutting. But when the workers arrived in New Mexico, the complaint says their phones and car keys were taken away, they were barred from leaving, and in some instances, family members were separated. Man, this sounds like Humble to me back in the day. But nonetheless, in a statement Wednesday, lawyers for the 15 workers said their clients were treated like animals and commended their bravery for coming forward. In a quote, ending forced labor requires that the proprietors of forced labor and those who seek to benefit from such schemes face serious consequences, attorney Aaron Halegua said. He also says, we hope that this lawsuit will demonstrate that such abusive practices do not pay. The lawsuit names as defendants Navajo businessmen Dene Benali and Irving Lin, a Taiwanese entrepreneur based in Los Angeles. It also names associates of Benali and Lin, as well as businesses linked to the farming operation, which authorities say ballooned to nearly 24 farms and more than 1,100 greenhouses spread across 400 acres, basically 162 hectares. At least 19 rooms at a motel in a nearby Farmington supported the operation, and the complaint alleges that workers were treated like prisoners at the motel, which was under watch by armed security guards and like machines while tolling in the fields, according to the complaint. Farmington police busted the operation on October of 2020, and they were called to the motel to investigate a strong odor of marijuana they found. 2,000 pounds of marijuana worth $3 million to $10 million. What is up with this math? According to the lawsuit, workers who were there at the time were arrested, but drug charges later were dropped. In late 2020, federal and state tribal authorities also raided the Shipwreck area farms, destroying 250,000 plants, and the Navajo Nation Department of Justice sued Benali, leading to a court order halting the operation that the lawsuit says Benali and his associates ignored. Benali didn't respond to phone and emailed requests for comment, and David Jordan, who represented Benali in the Navajo case, declined to comment on the lawsuit, although he denied that Benali ignored the tribal judge's order to halt farming. Lynn couldn't immediately be reached for comment on Wednesday, and it wasn't clear from the court records whether he has an attorney who could comment on his behalf, and a lawyer in New Mexico who represented Lynn previously wasn't available Wednesday evening either. But in March of 2021, affidavit detailed in the lawsuit, Lynn stated there was, in quotes, no evidence of human trafficking and no human rights violated by the farming operation. The lawsuit filed in Santa Fe seeks a jury trial and unspecified damages. Benali, a former Navajo Nation presidential candidate who campaigned on growing hemp to boost the economy, is accused in the lawsuit of turning a blind eye to federal and tribal laws that make it illegal to grow marijuana on the reservation. The complaint says he instructed his associates and the workers to refer to the marijuana as hemp to avoid law enforcement scrutiny. The lawsuit claims that Benali and Lynn intentionally targeted Chinese immigrants in California who were out of work in 2020 at the height of the coronavirus pandemic, and Philip Francisco, then chief of police for the Navajo Nation, previously estimated that there were 1,100 people working the operation, mostly foreign workers brought to New Mexico from Los Angeles, and other law enforcement officials estimated the number of workers surpasses 2,000. Navajo residents describe seeing the workers sleeping in the fields and in ditches, shivering through the night, the lawsuit states. And one worker said he slept on the floors of greenhouses and was never paid any of the roughly $12,000 in wages he was promised. Workers did not get adequate rest or enough food and water throughout the day, according to the lawsuit. And the workers were monitored by cameras and security guards, some of whom were armed, the complaint states. When they sought to leave or just rest, the lawsuit alleges they were forced to continue working. Well, this sounds like some pretty horrific conditions, but I wonder what you have to say about this, Dale, and this lawsuit. You're a little expert law master over there, and also anxious to hear what you have to say about this, Rochelle, from a human rights perspective. And this is Jason Beck for the High at 9 News. What do y'all think?
Well, my first thought is it's confusing of who has jurisdiction here. Federal government, through the Controlled Substances Act, has split jurisdiction with states. But the Indian nations, I mean, I'm not an expert in Indian law, and it looks like there was jurisdiction in the Indian nation because there was an Indian nation court
Mm-hmm.
ordered them to stop. Okay? So that's a bit confusing. And if they're in Santa Fe, is it in federal court or state court?
The lawsuit says that it was filed in Santa Fe, but to my thought is that they would only have jurisdiction on this under the tribal law, since these actions are alleged to be happening under the tribe's awareness, so per se.
Well, and that's the big issue here is who really has the right to step in and do anything about this. And I don't know if the reservation has ceded jurisdiction to the federal government over any of this stuff. And that would be an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
But if you drop down to the next level, I mean, it looks like they're trying to pump up the hemp there. And so they're probably not looking as closely at a cannabis plant, whether it's marijuana or hemp. And those have been issues we faced in California where people are sneaking hot hemp in, or actually just growing marijuana in a crop, and who's out there looking for it. That's one of the issues. And if you have a court order telling you to stop doing something and you violate the order, I go to court, and when you walk into court and the judge said you violated my order, what's your response? And if you ain't got a good one, you may be put in handcuffs and taken to jail.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is they're planning to do with somebody who blatantly violates a court order.
Very true. What are your thoughts on this, Rochelle?
Once again, we're talking about a narrative that's so prevalent in cannabis, right? Human rights abuses on these farms. And, it sounds like the case might have difficulty making it through based on what the evidence has found. But, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if the allegations were true, just because these types of things are so pervasive in our space and they're not talked about nearly enough. Murder Mountain was one thing, and that was a very sensationalized story, but there was some truth to it. I think the fact that workers in cannabis are not being protected, and we're not just talking about human trafficking, we're not just talking about sexual abuse, we're not just talking about abhorrent conditions, we're also talking about general safety, right? Wearing masks, being protected from all the different occupational hazards. In other industries, OSHA is so feared and respected, and I'm just curious if cannabis is even close to catching up to that, because the whole workman's comp and the federal Schedule 1 status, I feel like it kind of makes the situation a little dicier. What do you have to say about that, Dale?
Well, what we've experienced here in California is that the organized groups out here are Hmong. And they immigrated here after the Vietnam War, and there's a large group of them, and they contract with black market cultivation operations to go out and do their trimming. And I mean, I know some of the people who do this. They're, I actually like them, and I don't think that they abuse folks, okay? But the ones I know have a conscience. There are people out there who don't. And the horror stories of women having to trim with their shirts off for some, craven, misogynist prick, I think those are less of a problem. And what we face out here and have faced in California agriculture, they just work these workers to death. They only give them what they're required to give them. And the reason we have work comp and labor laws is because people have been abused and died in the past on these operations. And, I have one client who does trimming as a business. She had to get an agricultural contractor's license and then follow those rules because she's trying to be conscientious. But you find all over the place people who don't give two shits about the rules. They're there to make money. And the idea that someone would be forced to sleep on a floor and not paid $12,000 causes me to want to dig a little bit deeper. Because
Yeah.
that seems like abuse of your workers.
Well, not only that, Dale, but like how is this worker going to prove that they weren't paid that $12,000 that they are alleging that they're owed?
Well, to a certain extent, the state labor laws put the burden onto the employer, and that's where it should be. Okay, if somebody says, "Hey, I was promised this amount of money," and the employer can't prove that they actually paid that amount of money, they're looking at problems. And if somebody ends up being injured, you're going to have OSHA and you're going to have work comp people coming in there sticking a microscope up your ass. But these organizations really don't care. What surprises me is this is such a big operation on the Indian nation. It's already come under scrutiny, and they're still doing it. What we see out in California is they come in and pop an operation. They pull up their tent and go away, and half a mile away they're doing the same damn thing. So you got to keep playing whack-a-mole chasing them. This looks like a well-organized group right there in plain sight. How in the hell did this go on for so long?
Man, so you're saying that the onerous is on the employer to prove that they did pay the employee, correct, Dale?
Yeah.
So,
And
question.
you don't get to pay them in cash. I mean, you've got to have receipts. You've got to show that this person was paid and that you have a workers' compensation policy for them and you follow the labor laws. And in California, if somebody makes a complaint and they show up, you better, as the employer, be able to prove you were following the rules.
But this would fall under tribal law, though, Dale, as far as on the employment side. And so, how is it that that if there is none of these employment protections that there are in the state for the tribes, how are they supposed to prove that?
Well, this is where I don't know where they have jurisdictional cutoffs, because it's possible that you have a shared jurisdiction with the sheriffs and law enforcement around you and with the federal government, because there are federal and state labor laws. You just can't treat people like this. And that's possible, but it's also possible that they retain jurisdiction. And even if they have some, place where an office says this is, Indian OSHA or whatever the fuck they might want to call it, is there anybody there? Is anybody going to do anything?
Did you say Indian OSHA?
Well, Cal OSHA is what we call it. It could be, I don't know, whatever the tribe's name is, their Occupational Safety and Health Administration for that tribe, whatever they call it. Does it exist? I don't know.
Very true. I don't know the answers to this question either, but I know that this is a super interesting story, and I definitely feel for all the laborers that are put through those horrendous conditions.